Hey everyone, this is Aaron at Popaholic, and I am talking today to Ryan Dusick, who was the original drummer for Maroon 5 and also the band prior to that, Kara's Flowers. How are you doing today, Ryan?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Sure. I know you have a book coming out called it's called Harder to Breathe, a memoir of making Maroon 5. So tell me a little bit about from the beginning when you're 16 or so, and how did the band come to be? Just give a quick recap.
So the band Cars Flowers that went on to be Maroon 5, we started in my parents' garage when I was 16. Adam Levine, Jesse Carmichael, Mickey Madden, and I. We were just four idiots, teenagers dreaming of being at that time the next Pearl Jam or something like that, because it was the grunge era.
Right,
Um, and it was the way it came together was I was the drummer in the school band. I was playing with my older brother Josh, who was a great guitar player, and he and all the older guys went off to college, and I thought I was left alone without anyone to play with. And then I remembered my old friend Adam Levine, who was actually just a sort of family acquaintance that was at Brentwood at our high school now.
right.
I knew that he could sing and he could play some rhythm guitar, so I wanted to start a band with him. He knew these other two guys, Jesse and Mickey, and so he kind of twisted my arm into starting a band with them. And we were just, we were really green starting out in the garage.
Great. So eventually, what came from this was, your first full album. Well, I won't say the first, but more like your full real release, The Fourth World, and it had some great music on it. I think I was one of the few people who picked up the CD when it came out, along with a few other people I knew, because it was great power pop, and it's some excellent songs there. Soap Disco, Myself, Oliver. I think the reason it didn't, catch on so much maybe was because of promotion. I mean, uh, I know Adam has been quoted as saying it was a big disappointment at the time, and that you guys nearly broke up about it.
You froze there for a second. I think I got the gist of it.
Okay.
Yeah, the album The Fourth World was at a moment in our lives. We were just finishing high school, most of us. Uh, and we really believed we were going to go off on the road and become rock stars, because that's what the record label and everyone else was telling us.
Yes.
It was a major, record deal with Warner Brothers at the time, and they made us a big priority. They spent a ton of money on us. I think the problem was that we were very inexperienced. We were very precocious. We were beyond our years in terms of the natural talent. Um, and we had a real chemistry that was unique between the four of us. But what we didn't have was like lyrics. There wasn't really a lyric on the album. And I just think the timing wasn't right. We were sort of on the tail end of the Weezer Green Day era of the mid 90s.
Right.
And we were kind of, I think, trying to make another Weezer record with a heavy 60s British invasion sound to it as well. It just wasn't really the right time for us yet. We weren't really mature enough, I think, as musicians to really have the kind of success that we would later as Maroon 5.
Right. So once that sort of ends and you become Maroon 5, you develop what I won't call it an overnight success, because it took a long time for Songs About Jane to really catch on and become the big monster that it was, where it ended up being number 6 on the Billboard charts in 2004. But I mean, what was that process like of changing from where you were wearing all suits in Kara's Flowers to, really developing your own personalities, adding that urban element to a lot of the music later on?
Well, when the Cars Flowers album didn't sell and we had to come home from the road with our tails between our legs, it was very disappointing. I know Adam in particular was kind of heartbroken, and really, we didn't know if we were going to keep going as a band at that point. I mean,
Yeah.
we got dropped from our record label and we had to kind of start over from scratch. Um, it worked out that after a little bit of a hiatus, a little bit of a break from each other, we all were listening to a lot of the same music again, and it just happened to be music with a bit more of an R&B hip hop kind of feel to it, some classic soul as well as contemporary R&B and hip hop. Um, and that was just kind of a fluke because we took like 6 months apart from each other, I think, something about that. And when we came back together, we were on the same page again, and we realized that we had this chemistry that we couldn't deny between the four of us, and then five of us when James joined. Um, and it was just this renaissance in the band where we rediscovered or discovered our sound for the first time, really. But it was a decade into being a band together. And so the success of Songs About Jane was, an overnight success that took a decade to
Yes.
happen. And we were on the road for that album alone for 2 years before it was a big hit. We went out at the start of 2002, and it wasn't until 2004 when it became a big multi-platinum album.
Yeah, I think also the great thing about that particular album for me, it's my favorite Maroon 5 album, is because you guys didn't lose the melodic sense in all the music. I mean, the hits all had great choruses, great sing-along melodies, along with, the great rhythms that you added to everything. And so the story continues with you as the drummer, and a couple of years later, uh, what starts to happen with you?
Well, we were on the road nonstop basically for about 4 years in support of Songs About Jane. And it was a lot of work. It was exhausting. Certainly it was a lot of fun at the same time. I'm not going to tell you it was all work, but it was the never ending tour. And for me, I kind of, the first couple years, I leaned into it and tried to enjoy it, but I kind of knew in the back of my mind that I had some issues that it was going to make it difficult for me because I was a perfectionistic kid,
Yeah.
really hard on myself. I think I experienced a bit of imposter syndrome just because I was a self-taught drummer, and a lot of the musicians we were around at that point were really high level, highly trained musicians. Um, and I think that there was just this underlying anxiety that I hadn't dealt with that came to a head when the demands of the touring got so great that this external pressure was meeting up with the internal pressure that I put on myself.
Hmm.
So it was just kind of a powder keg that was brewing. And I had pre-existing injuries from baseball as a team element. There was a psychological element, and then there was this, the demands that we were under to perform to a very high level day after day. And
Sure.
you have to remember, like, it's not just the shows every night. Like when you're promoting a record, it's meet and greets and it's interviews and photo shoots and video shoots and flying overseas and doing all the promotions that's involved with it. So there, it was just unrelenting. And for an introvert like me who needs my downtime, needs to be alone sometimes, there just was none of that. So I was fine for a couple of years, but it just got to a point where it passed over a certain threshold, and it really just started to lead to a breakdown. Um, that became a literal nervous breakdown. I mean, I had pain in my joints, and my nerves just kind of stopped coordinating playing the drums. And I think it was really just my nervous system telling me you have to stop because this is killing you.
Wow. So, how did you approach Adam with this information? Was he sympathetic? Did he offer support, or was there some sort of tension there? Like, hey, man, why can't you just suck it up and keep going?
Well, I was trying to suck it up and keep going. That was my strategy, was just to try harder, just kind of put my head down and push through it. And that only works for so long. The reality was that the guys were noticing, the other guys in the band were noticing that my playing was starting to degrade. Um, and they were becoming concerned more than anything, like, what's going on? What, you used to play this a little differently, and now it's, you're dropping a beat, or you're missing that fill, or whatever it was that was happening just slowly over time that showed the wear and tear. Um, it became sort of the elephant in the room. It was something we didn't really want to talk about. Nobody really wanted
Right.
to address it head on. And you have to remember, this was 20 years ago. So the conversation that we're having today about mental health was just non-existent at that time.
Right.
So, being a kid in my 20s, a guy in my 20s, trying to be tough and just tough it out, I was probably a little self-conscious about looking weak or looking vulnerable. So I just tried to tough it out as best I could. And it just got to a point where nobody could ignore it anymore because the playing was suffering. And we were at this place now, we were playing on live TV in front of millions of people, and we were playing arenas in front of tens of thousands of people, in concert. And so we just really couldn't afford to have shows and big moments that were not up to snuff.
Understood. So the time comes, you have to tell Adam and the band, I have to leave, right? So, I mean, tell me a little bit about that experience. Was it bittersweet? Was it, what happened?
Well, at the time that I left the band, that was, the way that we depicted it in the sort of newsletter, was that it was a mutual decision for me to walk away. The reality is, and I read about this in my book, Harder to Breathe, in
Mhm.
the prologue, actually. The reality is that I would have played until my arms fell off if they allowed me to. Uh, but we had another album to make. We'd been touring on Songs About Jane for 4 or 5 years. Um, it was time to go back in the studio, make another album, and then start it all over again.
Right.
And so even if I could have gone in the studio and made another album as the drummer, Adam and the band were just very concerned that, once we get out on the road again, the same thing's going to happen.
Mhm.
So it was the band who made the decision, and it was Adam who delivered the news to me. You can imagine the scene. We were doing demos for the next album at the Houdini Mansion in Laurel Canyon.
Wow.
Um, and they called me into the dining room, and we all sat around the big table, and Adam was at the head of the table as he sort of became the leader of the band in that moment. And he delivered the news that was absolutely heartbreaking for me, and sent me, even deeper into a sort of tailspin of depression and anxiety and alcoholism.
Wow. So from this experience, you have to sort of rebuild your own life. And that's sort of, I guess, what the gist of this book is, correct?
Yeah, the purpose of this book, the reason that I wrote it, was that I was in recovery for a few years. I was back in school, getting a master's degree in clinical psychology, because my new passion was mental health and psychology.
Sure.
Um, and I just figured that this story that had been so tragic and so sad, um, had a happy ending now. And, that happy ending could offer some hope and recovery for people that could see themselves in the things that I struggled with. So the book, Harder to Breathe, is really, it's a journey. It's a roller coaster. It goes through all the fun times, the early years of the band where it was all about inspiration and creativity and fun. And
Right.
then through the really tough years when I struggled, having to leave the band and dealing with my demons, to, the last third of the book being about this new chapter of my life that is, really another inspiring moment of finding new purpose, finding fulfillment in the things that I'm doing now. I'm a therapist. I'm an author. I'm an advocate. I'm talking about mental health and recovery on a daily basis and finding it really meaningful. So, it kind of comes full circle in a really great way. And I'm just really grateful both for what I got to do, with the band and all the great things that we had achieved and they're continuing to achieve now. But also for what I'm doing now, which is also equally, if not maybe even more fulfilling, because there's the added element of service.
Right, and I think it's a wonderful story actually of recovery, and now that people are acknowledging, especially after the pandemic, people are acknowledging mental health as a serious challenge for people. It isn't something that isn't talked about anymore. It's brought up. So that I think also sort of gives the impetus to continue to talk about it and show success stories as opposed to things that failure stories, so to speak. And I think that's a wonderful thing that you're doing. And so the idea of deciding to write the book, when did that come about? Did that come about a little bit like after the recovery or just recently?
I actually had an idea to write a book about a decade ago. At the time, I was still really struggling. I was in the midst of dealing with the loss of that career. Um,
Hmm.
I was dealing with alcoholism and grief and anxiety and depression and all kinds of things. I knew I had some interesting stories to tell. There was a lot that happened in forming the band, in building up to the success we had, and then in me leaving the band that I thought were interesting stories. The problem was that I just didn't know what the purpose would be at that point, because it was, like I said, it was just kind of a sad story at that point. But fast forward, and I'm in recovery now, and I think that the change was that I was in grad school and I was studying clinical psychology, and I was writing self-reflection papers about, kind of doing case studies on myself about my own mental health. I had
Right.
been I had been telling my story in AA meetings. I had been volunteering at a recovery center, um, and it just kind of started coming out of me. I realized that, um, given the background that I had, everything that I'd been through, and given the education that I was gaining and my new perspective on mental health, I had a pretty unique perspective and platform from which to talk about these things and offer hopefully a little bit of what I gained in the process. So a little bit of wisdom, hopefully, both in having lived through what I did and in getting that education. So it almost felt like a responsibility to use that platform for some good, because not a lot of people are given the kind of things that I've been given, and I'm so grateful to have to be in the place in my life that I'm able to offer those things.
Well, I think that's wonderful. Are you still in touch with the band members at all? Do you occasionally email each other or text each other?
Yeah, I don't see the guys as much as I would like to. It's never going to be like it was when we were all in a
Sure.
bus together or a van driving around the country together. But I run into them, or Adam and I are still pretty close. We text and call each other late at night every now and then, and just we're silly like we were teenagers. Um,
You pick
but
up where you left off, I guess.
yeah, once you've been through something with a bunch of guys like that, it's kind of like having been in the army together or something like that, or having been on a championship baseball team together. You have that connection forever.
Right.
Um, and so whenever I see them, it's like no time has passed, and I try to see them as much as I can. I go to all the shows when they're in town and everything like that.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, Ryan, for your time. So I will provide a link to the book
Thank
in,
you. Thank you
in the
very much.
description underneath so people can get to it. Thank you again, Ryan, for your time, and I wish you continued success as a therapist. And hopefully, the book helps people as they discover your experience and your recovery.
Thanks so much, Aaron. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care now. Bye.
Bye.